Mindfulness is an approach and a set of tools that helps us change the way we interact with our thoughts and experience the world so that we don't get caught up in it. What does that mean? Well, let's break it down. So mindfulness has some roots in Buddhist and Hindu traditions, but it is an entirely secular form of therapy, and it comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn's Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. So he looked at what can we take from these traditions and what's genuinely useful, what can we test scientifically to see what works, and he developed this mindfulness-based stress reduction program where we use this idea of sitting with our thoughts and becoming comfortable with them. And since then, a great raft of what's called third wave therapies has been developed, including acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behaviour therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and metacognitive therapy. So what's mindfulness all about? Well, it's changing the way that we interact with our thoughts. Because typically when we have a thought, then we automatically believe it, we buy into it, we feel the need to act on it. And mindfulness says, well, actually, a thought is just a thought, and we can notice it's there without having to engage in it, without having to have the emotional reaction that we would normally have to our thoughts. And a lot of the problems that we experience comes from this idea of struggling with our thoughts. So we go into a fearful situation and we experience stress, anxiety, fear, and we feel that we shouldn't feel that way. And so we try to change it and we try to block those feelings out. And mindfulness suggests that a lot of our problems, a lot of the hardship in life, the suffering, comes from our attempts to block out those painful experiences. And instead, we should use a different strategy, and that strategy is acceptance. Now, note that acceptance isn't giving up. It's not that we're just going to live in fear or feeling depressed for the rest of our lives, but that we don't need to struggle against these feelings, because these feelings a lot of the time are perfectly natural. And so if we take the route of acceptance, where we're not going to struggle against the feelings, then we don't heap additional stress and additional pressure on ourselves. We just allow the feeling to come in, we don't let it bother us, and we just wait for it quietly to leave. And this approach has proved very successful in a lot of these third wave therapies are demonstrating some great levels of efficacy in being able to change the way we interact with these thoughts so we don't end up in these cycles of anxiety and depression that many of us find ourselves in. Now, the way that mindfulness techniques are delivered is a real range of different ones. So for example, in acceptance and commitment therapy, that looks very much like traditional psychotherapy. So it's done on an individual basis. There's a client, there's a counsellor, and while the counsellor might do a bit of teaching and use some of the techniques, it looks a lot like, say, a cognitive behavioural session. On the other end of the spectrum, there's something like mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a very different form of psychotherapy because these are taught like a class. So you might go into a class of, say, 12 people and you'll all practice these mindfulness techniques together, and it's a real learn by doing, and rather than it just being a one-to-one partnership, it's taught like a class and you're learning skills for how to change the way you interact with our thoughts. So a real broad spectrum there of kind of traditional one-to-one to this class-based approach, but it's all founded on this foundation of using mindfulness to change the way we interact with our thoughts.